please stand and welcome Governor John Hickenlooper. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please sit down. I don't want to interrupt your chewing, and I always get a little uncomfortable when people jump to their feet. Makes me think they're going to want to throw something. Tom, thank you so much, and thank you to the Aurora Rotary for putting this event on. I think it's a wonderful tradition. As you know, I'm a fellow Rotarian. I still have the four-way test. We just were hanging it in the governor's office, mayor's office, the governor's office. There you go. But I'm really here. I'm going to speak for just 2 minutes, and please keep eating. You know, after almost 20 years in the restaurant business, I'm used to talking above the clatter of silverware, and I mean that sincerely. I'm here just to pay obeisance, which is a big word that means demonstrate love and affection, for Ed Tower. And you know, Ben Franklin once said, "We must indeed all hang together, or assuredly we will all hang separately." And Ed Tower and I both got elected in 2003, our respective cities, and so we were mayor newbies together. And there was certainly a history of adversarial relationships between many of the suburban metropolitan Denver communities, but I think Denver and Aurora were kind of the poster children for that. There were issues around business development, the movement of the University of Colorado Medical Center, poaching one business from another. Water was obviously an issue. And Ed came and saw me. Actually, he was, even before he got elected, but he was clearly the front runner. I had just been elected. I hadn't even taken office yet. And we talked about ways that we could put the past behind us, and without putting any blame or worrying about, you know, details of any sort, let's try and create a template to resolve issues going forward. And you know, I think that a lot of the success we've had in this metropolitan region around fast tracks and collaborative approaches towards water would never have happened if we hadn't had Ed Tower as mayor of Aurora. He was, from the word go, excited and enthusiastic about this opportunity to set a new tone, about how we could work together. You remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a terrible water drought. And Denver, of course, had senior water rights, so they didn't have, the pressure wasn't on us as much, so we weren't being as strict with our citizens as Aurora was being forced to be, and that made it hard for Aurora in a lot of different ways. And I mean, that was the kind of thing that made such sense to me, right? We're in this together, right? And it allowed us to push Denver farther, just to make sure we retained this solidarity, that we were all in this together, and that we would assuredly hang separately if we didn't hang together. You look at the issues around economic development, right? Cities used to poach each other's businesses, and within 6 months, we had an agreement with Aurora that we would not offer any incentive. Denver would not offer an incentive to an Aurora business to move existing jobs to Denver, nor would Aurora offer an incentive to a Denver business to move existing jobs in their city. And once we got that in place, that agreement is now between almost every metropolitan community in all metropolitan Denver. That we're not going to worry about a business that comes to the metro area, whether it ends up in Aurora or Denver or Lakewood or Centennial. We have the mayor of Centennial here. I have to make sure that we respect that. We want to make sure that the business comes to the metropolitan area, and then we'll worry about where they headquarter, and their employees are going to live all over the place and commute in and spend their tax dollars all over the place. And no better place than the collaboration that Ed Tower helped create was in Fast Tracks. The ability to imagine a regional solution to our mobility problems and our congestion and the amount of time our employees and workers spend stuck in traffic jams. Ed played a crucial, pivotal role. And oftentimes when people say, well, you know, Mayor Hickenlooper helped usher in Fast Tracks, there would have been no Fast Tracks without Ed Tower, and that is an absolute fact. So I think that it is a great pleasure to come and get. He came to my first State of the City speech. I get to come to this one. It is certainly a pleasure to be able to say that we work together to build a better Colorado and a better metropolitan area and a better Aurora. I think your wisdom and even your humor will be remembered. You know, he came in one time to one of the early meetings with a full life-size statue of Elvis Presley and presented it to me. I won't get into the details, but it was hugely embarrassing, deeply troubling. But we were able to demonstrate that we could put aside differences in political parties and in history. There is, my last point, and I'll step down, there is some residual concern and issue over whether Ed Tower really is a Republican. Now, I know people are always asking whether I'm really a Democrat, right? And that's a fair question, I entertain it. But, you know, Ed Tower fast tracks a pretty big tax increase. Ed Tower's a pretty strong supporter. If you look at his work around, you know, homeless and a lot of the social issues in Aurora, he's found a way to do it. Now, admittedly, he's avoided spending money. He's even more frugal than I am, if that's possible. But he has shown a great social conscience and a willingness to recognize the relationship between a strong business community and making sure that you take care of the last and least. I wonder whether in his next career, he might end up turning out to be a Democrat in the end. Anyway, Ed, thank you so much for all your service to this city and to the entire state. Ed Tower was the perfect partner in terms of really, Denver and Aurora had been so long at odds, and he saw so clearly, and having a business background, he saw so clearly the benefit that would come, not just to Aurora, but to the whole metropolitan area, by him, you know, putting aside sometimes Aurora's specific interest to see a larger self-interest. And, you know, we could never have done all this that we've gotten done in the last 8 years without, you know, Ed Tower and the other Metro mayors.
Aurora has really grown over the last few years dramatically from a bedroom community, moving on with wonderful programs such as the Anschutz campus and such as the E470 corridor, the DIA development, the redevelopment of Lowry, Stapleton, all surrounding Aurora. So it was important that we had a mayor that would work regionally. And you can see that Mayor Tower's work with other mayors in the area that surrounds Aurora is so important.
Our relationship with the mayor and the city council is probably one of the most important relationships that we have. Because of what we do, if we didn't have such a close relationship with them, we wouldn't be able to do our jobs. That's been so nice about Mayor Tower is that he really has a passion for economic development. So every project that we've worked on in the last 10 years, we've probably worked on 500 projects. He always gets involved in every single one, from Raytheon to Northrop Grumman to Ecotech.
It's very important that the city and the builders get along. The building obviously creates a burden to the city, but at the same time it creates opportunities for commercial growth and employment growth. And I think Mayor Tower, under his leadership with the city, have recognized that opportunity and have really struck a good balance between residential construction and commercial and employment development.
From the very beginning, in the mid-90s, when we heard that Fitzsimmons was going to be closed, the University of Colorado Hospital and the mayor's office created a very, I think, unique bond, if you will, to make this whole venture happen, to make this new development come to reality. Today, we can see the fruits of their labors coming to pass, where we have developed a major, significant, world-class academic health center at what used to be an old Army medical base.
Well, several years back, we started the first business improvement district in Aurora. We had great help from the city council and the mayor, and it really took off for us. Havana Street has done very well since then. We see great investment happening right now, storefronts being remodeled, increased traffic, lots of great events. So what we did together worked.
Well, I've been really impressed with the partnership we've had with the city and Aurora Public Schools. When we talk about, we have a Leaders or Readers program where we have the mayor and the city council come in and read to our kids, which they really appreciate, all the way to this amazing award ceremony we have every year called Aurora Scholars, in partnership with Cherry Creek and Aurora Public Schools and, of course, the city.
When Mayor Tower campaigned that he wanted to improve the city by tearing down the ratty old wooden fences and replacing them with the mason fences, we just went bananas. We thought that was the best thing you could have ever done for the city. And in fact, it has been transpiring throughout the city, and it's looking beautiful.
And he came forward and came to the club and said, let's try this again. I'm really behind this. Like to form a committee and just work on and seeing if we can't get it on the ballot again. And so we formed a committee. We met at Ed's house, and there we went. It draws national attention. You know, you can bring national events to the city. We had the regionals there for soccer. We would have never been able to have an event like that here in Aurora without having those 23 fields.
I remember vividly one time going over and having dinner with the mayor and his wife, and they were so warm, and Helen and I went over there. You know, Ed's a woodworker on the side. He's got a great, workshop at his home. And just to be invited in there, he's got the ability to make you feel like you're somebody, and that you matter. That's obviously, I think, a big part of his success.
Now that we've seen the video of Ed's fan club, let me introduce to you the son of Paul and Kate Tower and Betsy Tower's husband, Ed Tower, our favorite son from Aurora.
You know, that's kind of embarrassing, to be perfectly honest. When you see something like that, it talks about somebody, and the thing that's, I think, often left out is that nobody does any of those kinds of things alone. Every once in a while, I've had the really special privilege of being in the front, but everything that we've ever done in the last 50 years in this city has been a whole bunch of people. And all the things that you see where people talked about, I helped do this or I did that, the truth is that it was the entire city council, it was our friends, it was the people in all the neighborhoods in Aurora, and I'm really humbled that you all would come here today, so thank you very much. It's kind of special to have the governor come and talk about you, and I've been debating just how many stories I should tell you about the governor. I'm going to share maybe one with you because I know that he shares one about my father every once in a while, so I have one shot to get back at him a little bit. I remember the first time that he came to our offices in the city of Aurora. And you have to remember, think back 10 years ago, what are the odds that the mayor of Denver would have come to the offices of any of our suburban communities? Well, the fact is that wouldn't have happened without a person like John. And I think he was absolutely the person we needed as the mayor of Denver at the time. And he is the right person to be the governor of Colorado today. So let's say thank you to John Hickenlooper. So my office is on the top floor of the city building, and it looks to the west. So when he came up, before we got started with the meeting, I asked him to come over to the window, and we looked out to the west, and it was a clear day, and you could see downtown off in the distance. I said, you see those buildings out there? He goes, oh yeah, that's downtown. I said, yeah. I said, do you know why I requested having this office? He goes, no. Well, I told him I wanted to be a spotter for the artillery. and he turned and kind of looked at me and took a step back and got this big grin on his face and said, so it's going to be like that today, is it? So, the best thing about John that not everybody knows is that the governor has a terrific sense of humor. And I think it's one of the things, besides his warm heart, and that when he says something, it's not what his handlers told him to say, it's what he honestly feels. And that being genuine is, I think, why you're such an asset to our state. So thank you again for coming. Yeah. So I was thinking about what should we talk about today, and one of my fellow mayors said, well, don't they give you a whole list of all the accomplishments that the city had that year, and isn't that what you write your speech on? I said, oh, they give me that list every year, and then they walk out of the office and it goes into a special file. I think everybody has that special file in their office. And I wanted to talk to you about a couple of ideas today. A few months ago, my computer started to have a problem at my house, so I went to the store where I bought it, and they said, well, we don't really service that anymore. You have to talk to the manufacturer. So I emailed the manufacturer, and they didn't have the part I needed. So I tracked them down on the phone, and I said, hey, I've got an 18-month-old computer. What do you mean you don't make the part I need? I said, well, we just assumed that nothing lasts more than 2 years, and that you're going to go buy a new one. And that's kind of the age that we live in, the social media age, the internet age. Everything happens so fast. But communities don't really work that way. Places like Aurora, places like the state of Colorado, are really much longer ideas. And so it made me think about, of all things, and yes, I am going to pay for this later, about my honeymoon. And I could hear my mother laughing about that. When Betsy and I got married, we'd never traveled anywhere together before. And we decided that, we ought to try this like adventure travel. So we decided to go to Europe for 2 weeks. And at the time, we didn't really have the same kind of traveling style. How many of you ran into that with your spouses? Well, let's just say that one of us had the kind of travel style where they could get on a plane and fly to Europe and not need a map, just assume when we get there, people will tell us where to go, we'll talk to people, it's no big deal. And then I think, have you all been someplace where you went to travel and there's somebody there with the guidebook? And not only do they have the guidebook, but the guidebook actually is highlighted with different color highlighters. And those people kind of scare you. Well, we had those two kind of travel styles. So while we were learning a lot about each other on our honeymoon, we also went to see some castles. Now, we don't have a lot of castles in this country. So as we were looking around at these castles, I discovered something that is kind of surprising. Usually they built a castle kind of up on a hill, and when you look at it, it looks like this one big thing that just almost like popped out of the hill. But when you go inside and take a tour, you find out that's not what it is at all. That the castle usually started very, very small, and that no one person ever built the castle. The whole town came together, and they started by building one little piece. And then a generation or two later, they'd add on to it. And they'd add on and add on. And over 500 or 600 or 700 years, they'd go from this little thing to this big castle. And the interesting part was when you do a tour, you can see where each generation built something onto the castle. And every generation built a little bit differently. They all had their own style. They all did things their own way. But in the end, they ended up having a castle that worked. And the key was that every generation, as you built onto the castle, you had to make sure that what you're building fit with what was there before. And you had to make sure you created a good base for the people that come after you. So the secret to a castle was that it was never really done. That the key was, in your generation, in your time in this town, did you take what people had given you as a base, as a foundation? Did you add on to it, and did you make a foundation for the people who came after you? It's not a question of did you get everything done, it's a question of did you move the castle forward a little bit? And it made me think about that when I was getting my lesson in how the industry works and having to go buy a new computer, that our community is really a lot like a castle. And we're all the townspeople of the castle. And nothing gets built by any one person. Things get built because all of us come together. And the question we ask ourselves from time to time is, have we moved the castle forward a little bit? Have we built onto and respected what people gave us before, taken care of that, and added something for the people who come after us? Well, in the city of Aurora, we actually had a really great foundation that people gave us. We had terrific neighborhoods that were full of wonderful people with hopes and dreams and aspirations. And that's really the cornerstone of the castle that we call a community. We had a brand new base that was being stood up at Buckley Air Force Base, the first new base in the United States in 20 years. Phenomenal project. We had the new sports park that you heard about a minute ago. We had a new interchange at Alameda and 225. We had a terrific new set of businesses that were coming in along E470 and new neighborhoods that were being added to our community. But we also had this little idea called Fitzsimmons. Everybody heard of Fitzsimmons? Okay. And the real foundation of Fitzsimmons wasn't the land, and it wasn't the buildings that were there before, and it wasn't the buildings that might be built on it someday. There were two real foundations that we got from Fitzsimmons. The first one was a partnership with the University of Colorado, the University Hospital and Children's Hospital. That partnership was the real foundation. But the second thing, which is what I think we've been really able to build off in the last 10 years, is an attitude. You know, I remember when I was first mayor, I'd been mayor for about, like half an hour, and I got a call from a show called Hardball, which is on MSNBC, and they asked me to come and talk about redevelopment of bases. And they asked us what our secret was, because before we were on, all these other communities were complaining about their bases being closed and how horrific it was and how the community would never recover. And we said, well, gee, we really don't have a secret. We just decided that if somebody gives you a problem, sooner or later, look at it as an opportunity. And that's what the people of Aurora did in the foundation that they gave us. We took Fitzsimmons from being a problem, turned it around and said, what can you do with a square mile of free land? And I think that's the cornerstone of what all of us were given by the people who came before us. So I wanted to spend a minute and talk about kind of what we've done in the last 6, 8, 10 years to build on the foundation that we were given. You know, the first thing we did is take that attitude and say, we're going to keep going with this idea that in Aurora, we do things for ourselves. We don't wait for someone else to make it okay. We're going to do it ourselves. And you saw a few minutes ago about the fence program. For those of you that aren't familiar with it, you know how when you drive down a lot of suburban cities throughout the country, you see these long lines of fences and some of them don't look very well? We came up with a program that allows the neighborhoods to create a special tax district to build their own fence. It's about local pride. It's about taking control. It's about doing things for yourself. That's really what we've built on in Aurora. Same thing is true with the Havana Improvement District that you saw Paul Suss talking about. It's about taking control of our own destiny and saying, we're going to make it better. I know a lot of you are familiar with the Heather Ridge Golf Course. Do you all know where that is? A few years ago, there was concern that the Heather Ridge Golf Course might be sold and that somebody might turn it into condos. 12 different neighborhoods that are around Heather Ridge said, you know what we'd like to do? We want to take control of it ourselves. And they formed a special district to tax themselves to say, if someone's going to buy this, it's going to be us. And we're going to make sure that we're in charge of what happens next. It's that idea of saying, we're going to be okay, that Aurora's going to make it on our own, that we're going to build the castle, we're not going to wait for someone else to do it for us. And I don't think there's a better example of how we could do that in Aurora than Fitzsimmons. You know, if you look around the country, there is really no greater success story in this entire country over the last decade than Fitzsimmons and the Anschutz campus. And I'd like to ask us to give a quick round of applause to our partners on the campus. When they were originally looking at the campus, it was going to take 20 to 50 years to build out Fitzsimmons. With the help of our business community, with the help of our citizens, and with the help of especially AEDC and the work that they did, we were able to get the legislator to support a new kind of financing so that instead of taking 20 to 50 years, the university was able to build out in 6. And then with that came our partners at the hospitals. They built out, had smooth transitions. Can you think of anything more successful that we've been able to do in our time as the townspeople of this castle than to say in less than 5 years after opening, 2 hospitals are now looking to expand? You just can't have a better success story than that. It's because we all came together and did it. It wasn't just one single person. It was a whole group of people saying, let's make this happen. It was building partnerships like the governor was talking about earlier that made that happen. The same thing happened on 225. Does everybody remember 10 years ago? 225 was 2 lanes the whole way, and Fitzsimmons, instead of making things better, was looking like it might make the congestion worse. Today, the entire interchange at Colfax and 225 is funded and under construction. 225 will have 3 lanes from I-70 down to Mississippi, and with a program that we're working on with CDOT and with RTD, it will also get funding to extend the 3 lanes from Parker to Iliff, leaving us only 1 mile that needs to be 3-laned. I agree. We didn't stop there. Look at what we've done on environmental issues. You know, usually you don't think of a suburban community as being strong on environmental issues. But today, because of what we've done together as the townspeople of this castle, the absolute best test facility for large-scale solar projects is in the city of Aurora. Now, you probably haven't driven past it because it's on land that we own out by Watkins. But you might see it if you're flying into DIA from the south and you see these big squares down there that look like solar panels. That's because they are. And that's a test facility in the city of Aurora that we built in cooperation with Excel and NREL. But with that, I think probably the most important thing that we've been able to do, kind of as our time in helping with the castle, is the relationships that the governor was talking about. You know, relationships a lot of times are started by individuals. And really, we could not have the relationship that we have with Denver if it weren't for John Hickenlooper. Although I do have to tell you, the Chief of Staff, Roxanne Wright, Rox, you want to wave for a minute? She knows John and I pretty well, and so when John said that we could either hang separately or we could hang together, she turned to me and said, "What would it take to hang you together?" So I'm going to pay for that one later, too. But really, those relationships are, I think, one of the things that our generation is able to say, look at something we've done. If you look at the recent election that's going on for mayor of Denver, one of the things that's been happening is people will ask the candidates, not, do you support metropolitan cooperation? They're asking, how will you support it? In a relatively short time, as a community, we've been able to change the expectation. So the idea is not, will you work with your neighbors? It's, tell us how. We expect that today. And that didn't really come from just elected officials. What it really came from is people in the community saying, that's our new expectation of you. That's what we want you to do. And it isn't just with the city of Denver, although that's often what gets the most publicity. We really have stepped up the relationship we have with both Adams and Arapahoe County. And if you look at the transportation projects that we've been able to work on, 225, Peoria and Smith Road, none of those would have been possible without the support of our county commissioners in Adams and Arapahoe County. And since they came here today, I'd like to ask you to applaud for them as well. And I think that's one of the things that's going to really endure for us. When we say, what are the parts of the castle that can last the longest? That idea of building relationships is really one of them. And the last thing I want to talk about that I think we've been able to do with our time in the town is our city council was such a strong advocate on water. You know, try and think of a castle without a water supply inside. It kind of defeats the whole purpose. And as the governor mentioned, in 2002, we had a terrific drought. I think everybody remembers that. And our city council responded by saying, we're going to make sure that the next time we have a drought, the people of Aurora are going to have a safe, reliable water supply, even in the worst of times. And if we think about us as being the people building a castle, you can't leave a castle for the next generation if it doesn't have the basic necessities. And our city council really stepped to the plate, and it wasn't easy. We spent $650 million of your money, which is kind of an odd thing to congratulate yourselves for doing. But that effort is going to secure the future of the current citizens of the city of Aurora and our children as they come to live in our community as well. And I'd really think that for sticking their necks out and taking the risk on that, our city council deserves a warm round of applause. So when you look back over kind of our time in the last few years and what we've been able to do as a team, all of us together, there's a lot of things for us to be proud of. But just like when you look at a castle, the truth is the work's never done. And in our case, there's still plenty of things to do to help make this community that we call Aurora an even better place. One of the things is that you can look at redevelopment and say, how can we continue to do redevelopment? You know, the University of Colorado and the University of Denver have a competition every year. They both have a real estate school, and every year they'll pick a project somewhere in the metro area, and they'll turn these young people loose to look at what would you do on that project. And it's really exciting. And this year, the project that they chose wasn't redevelopment in downtown. It wasn't a greenfield way out east or north or south. The project they chose was the intersection of 225, Peoria, and Parker Road. We don't always think about the many opportunities that we have for redevelopment. Opportunities we've seized recently, like not just the area across the street from Fitzsimmons, where I think you've seen all the terrific things that are going on there with a new office building and a new hotel, like the projects that the city pushed with our partners in the private sector on Florence Square, like the terrific new project that is the Gardens on Havana. And by the way, can we have a quick amen for the replacement of Buckingham Square? How about that? So, I remember the first conversation I had with Kevin Hogan. He said, so, you want to run for city council? Yeah. You going to do something about Buckingham? And I think my response was eventually, which turned out to be a little bit more sage than I thought it was at the time. But that kind of redevelopment is something that we can keep doing and that the people who come after us need to continue to look at as well. I think a cornerstone of what we've been able to build as a foundation that the people who come after us really need to continue to look at is the relationships that we've built. Now, Aurora's gone from being a suburban community to a real metropolitan asset. And I think that's probably one of the most important things that we can continue to work on as a community. Expect that from your elected leaders. Push that. Ask them how they're making that move forward. I think, though, that one of the things that's easy to forget is that you can always improve as a city government. And we're certainly no exception. Now, I want to talk about one specific idea for just a minute today, and that's 2 per thousand. Now, how many of you are familiar with 2 per thousand? Can I see a quick show of hands? There's a lot of people that are kind of giving me a blank stare, although one person raised both hands. I'm not sure exactly what that meant, but 2 per thousand is something that the voters of Aurora passed about 18 years ago. It was a very well-intended idea, and it said that for every 1,000 people in population, the city is required to have 2 police officers. And it was passed at a time when the economy was doing pretty well. What it didn't take into account was that over time, the economy might not be doing so well, and that as we would do that, our public safety costs would continue to occupy a larger and larger and larger portion of our city budget. And what that means is that all the other things we do that make us a good place to live are constantly being squeezed. If you go back 18 years ago, our entire public safety system, police, fire, courts, dispatch, the whole thing, was about 43% of our budget. Today, it's 59%, which means that all the other departments have had a cut of about 30%. Well, that's just not sustainable. Well, the easy answers to fixing 2 per thousand aren't going to work. Leaving it alone is not going to work. Raising taxes in the next few years, I don't think that's going to happen. Doing away with it, that's not going to happen. So we need to think out of the box, and that's one of the things we have to do in the future is what is a fourth option for what we want to do about this well-intended idea of 2 per thousand. You know, people are always saying, well, we need a different idea, and they're not coming up with one. So let me give an example of what that might look like. We don't do away with 2 per thousand, we modify it. Today, it's 59% of our budget for all of public safety. What if we said, over the next 3 years, we're going to grow public safety from 59 to 62% of our budget. But once we get there, it's going to be locked in at 62% forever, and we get to spend that 62% in a lot of different ways. One year, we might hire police officers. The next year, we might hire some police officers and some firefighters. The year after that, heaven forbid, we actually buy some new police cars, some new fire engines, or we actually give our firefighters and police officers a raise. Because if we don't change something, we won't be able to do that on a consistent basis. Now, that may not be the right fourth answer, but the point is, the people who come after us, well, after what we've built on, are going to have to look at a new and different way of addressing 2 per thousand. So maybe there's two last things that the people who come after us can look at. One of them is, when I started, I was telling you about my computer, and today we live in what I'm going to call the social media age. You know, I have a daughter that lives in San Diego, and my wife and my daughter play Scrabble with each other over their iPhones. We connect to people all over the country. But what's easy to forget when we do that is how do we connect to our neighbors? How do we connect to our friends? How do we connect to the other parents in the soccer club? And if there was one person I could add to the city government next year, it would be somebody whose full-time job was to say, how do we make the city a focal point for people to connect with their neighbors through the internet and through new media? Let's not be against those kinds of connections. Let's use them to bring people together in this community that we call the city of Aurora. And finally, the last thing that I think the people who come after us can look at is there's this vision that we call Aurora. There's this idea that says there's a community here. It's worth working on. It's worth fighting for. It's why all of you are here today. It's why the Rotary works so hard to do the projects that they do. The most important thing we can do is make that foundation for the people who come after us. Say, this is worth it. Spend your time here. You'll get the same kind of rewards we have. Take the time and pass on the vision of that castle we call the community of Aurora. I want to thank you all for being here today, and I really appreciate you coming out to my last State of the City.